The cruelest words are often spoken just moments before destiny changes everything. The silver bells of Moonfall Hall echoed beneath a ceiling painted with ancient wolves and glowing constellations as hundreds of pack members filled the grand chamber in their finest clothes, each hoping to witness the most celebrated mating ceremony of the year. Every noble family stood proudly beneath embroidered banners while servants hurried quietly between rows of polished oak benches, making certain every candle burned perfectly before the moon goddess's sacred altar. At the center of the hall stood Evelyn Carter, her ivory gown simple compared to the jeweled dresses surrounding her, yet she wore it with quiet dignity that no expensive fabric could imitate. Her pale skin reflected the warm candlelight, and loose strands of chestnut hair framed a face that revealed more kindness than confidence. She had spent 3 years believing tonight would finally bring peace to her life. Damien Holloway, the man who had promised forever beneath the old cedar tree outside their village, now stood only a few feet away wearing the formal black ceremonial jacket of a future alpha. His confident smile had once made her believe she was safe. Tonight, she searched his eyes for that same warmth, but found only distance. The elder raised both hands, silencing every whisper inside the hall. Tradition demanded one simple question before the sacred bond could be confirmed. Damien Holloway, do you willingly claim Evelyn Carter as your future mate before the moon goddess and this pack? A long silence settled over the chamber. Evelyn's heartbeat echoed louder than the distant bells. Then Damien laughed. It was soft at first, almost polite, until it grew sharp enough to slice through every hopeful dream she had carried into the hall. He slowly turned away from her, letting every eye follow his movement before speaking with calm certainty. Claim her. His voice carried effortlessly across the silent room. She's worthless. A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the crowd. Evelyn felt every face turning toward her like winter wind pressing against bare skin. Damien continued without hesitation. She has no strength worthy of standing beside me. She embarrasses my name, my family, and this pack. I refuse to spend my future protecting someone who offers nothing in return. Gasps became whispers. Whispers became laughter. Several nobles nodded in agreement while others looked away, unwilling to defend the woman standing alone beneath the sacred moonlight. Evelyn lowered her eyes, not because she believed his words, but because the weight of hundreds of judging stares felt heavier than stone. Her fingers tightened around the small silver engagement ring resting in her palm. She could have shouted. She could have begged. Instead, she quietly drew one slow breath, refusing to let them watch her break. High above the gathering, hidden behind the carved balcony where only honored rulers were permitted to stand unseen, a tall figure dressed in a dark traveling cloak observed every heartbreaking second in complete silence. His silver eyes never left Evelyn Carter. The laughter lingered long after Damien stepped away from the altar, growing louder as confidence spread through the crowd like a cold breeze before a storm. Some whispered behind jeweled fans while others openly shook their heads, convinced they had just witnessed the inevitable fate of an Omega, who had never belonged beside a future Alpha. Evelyn remained exactly where she stood, her shoulders straight despite the humiliation surrounding her. The silver engagement ring rested quietly in her open hand, suddenly lighter than she remembered, as though every promise attached to it had vanished the moment Damien rejected her. The elder slowly lowered the ceremonial staff, his expression heavy with disappointment rather than surprise. According to tradition, the broken engagement had officially dissolved before the moon goddess, leaving Evelyn without a future, without protection, and in the eyes of many without value. Damien accepted sympathetic handshakes from influential families, as if he had made a wise political decision instead of shattering someone's heart. His mother approached with an approving smile and adjusted the collar of his jacket. "You made the correct choice," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. A leader cannot build a strong future beside weakness. Several people nodded in agreement, reinforcing the cruel judgment until it sounded less like opinion and more like accepted truth. Evelyn quietly closed her fingers around the ring and turned toward the side aisle leading away from the altar. Every step felt strangely calm. The tears threatening her eyes refused to fall, held back by a quiet strength she had never realized she possessed. She noticed a serving tray lying on the polished stone floor where an elderly servant had stumbled moments earlier while trying to avoid the growing crowd. Silver cups had rolled in every direction, and the old man's hands trembled as he struggled to gather them before anyone noticed. Guests walked around him without slowing, careful not to wrinkle expensive clothes or interrupt conversations. Evelyn knelt beside him without hesitation. She collected each cup one by one, gently placing them back onto the tray before offering the man a warm smile. "You did nothing wrong," she whispered. "Everyone loses their balance sometimes." Relief softened the old servant's tired eyes. "Thank you, Miss Carter," he murmured, surprised that someone carrying such fresh sorrow still found room for kindness. Before she could answer, a faint whimper reached her ears. Beneath one of the banquet tables, hidden by flowing tablecloths, a small white wolf pup cowered with one paw caught beneath an overturned wooden stool. Startled by the noise and frightened by unfamiliar scents, the young animal shook uncontrollably. Evelyn carefully lowered herself onto the marble floor, speaking in the gentle voice her late mother had always used with frightened animals. The pup slowly relaxed as she lifted the lightweight stool and freed its tiny paw. She stroked its soft fur until its trembling eased, then smiled when the little wolf cautiously licked her fingertips before trotting safely toward a nearby handler. Hardly anyone noticed the moment. Those who did dismissed it with indifferent glances, believing compassion carried no value in a world that admired power above all else. Yet from the shadowed balcony high above the ceremony, the cloaked observer watched every quiet gesture with growing interest. While the crowd remembered only Damien's rejection, his eyes remained fixed on the woman who had chosen kindness when bitterness would have been easier. For the first time that evening, the corners of his mouth lifted into the faintest hint of a smile. The celebration resumed around Evelyn as though nothing important had happened, the orchestra filling Moonfall Hall with graceful melodies that only made the loneliness in her chest feel deeper. Noble families drifted toward long banquet tables covered with polished silver and crystal glasses, eager to discuss alliances, future marriages, and Damien Holloway's so-called wise decision. Every cheerful laugh reminded her how quickly people could erase another person's dignity when it no longer benefited them. She quietly stepped away from the crowded hall and wandered toward the moonlit garden that surrounded the ancient palace. Cool evening air brushed against her face, carrying the fragrance of pine trees and blooming white roses. For the first time since entering the ceremony, she could breathe without feeling hundreds of eyes measuring her worth. She stopped beside a marble fountain where moonlight shimmered across the still water. Her reflection looked almost unfamiliar. The hopeful young woman who had arrived only an hour earlier had disappeared, replaced by someone carrying silent disappointment behind calm eyes. She opened her hand once more and looked at the small silver ring resting in her palm. Instead of anger, she felt gratitude that the truth had revealed itself before a lifetime had been built upon empty promises. With one gentle motion, she placed the ring on the fountain's edge, leaving behind not only a broken engagement, but also the future she had imagined for herself. Behind a row of towering cedar trees, hidden from every guest, the cloaked stranger continued watching without announcing his presence. King Lucian Ashthorne had attended countless ceremonies throughout his reign. He had witnessed displays of strength, ambition, and carefully rehearsed loyalty from every powerful family across the Northern Territories. Yet, genuine kindness had become so rare that he recognized it immediately when it appeared. Most people, after suffering public humiliation, would have searched for revenge or sympathy. Evelyn Carter had done neither. She had chosen compassion for strangers while carrying her own heartbreak in silence. That single decision lingered in his thoughts far longer than Damien's arrogant speech. One of the royal guards quietly approached the king from behind the trees and lowered his head respectfully. "Your Majesty, the council is waiting inside. They are prepared to introduce the daughters of every high alpha family." Lucian did not move. His silver eyes remained fixed on the woman standing alone beside the fountain. "Tell the council they will wait." The guard hesitated, surprised by the unusual response, but bowed without another question and disappeared into the shadows. Evelyn never noticed the exchange. She gently touched the cool stone rim of the fountain and closed her eyes for only a moment, whispering a simple prayer that her heart would never become as cold as the words spoken against her that evening. The quiet sincerity of that prayer reached the ears of the one man in the kingdom whose opinion could change every life inside Moonfall Hall. Lucian slowly removed the dark leather gloves covering his hands and lowered the hood that had hidden his face since arriving. Moonlight reflected across silver hair and calm gray eyes marked by quiet authority. The disguise that had allowed him to observe without interruption had served its purpose. The time for watching was ending. The time for revealing himself had finally arrived. Moonfall Hall had returned to its elegant rhythm by the time Evelyn walked back through the towering oak doors. Music floated beneath the crystal chandeliers, polished shoes glided across the marble floor, and conversations once again revolved around wealth, influence, and future alliances. It was as though her humiliation had become nothing more than another passing moment of entertainment. She quietly slipped toward the edge of the hall, hoping to leave before anyone noticed her again. Then every candle flickered at once. The musicians stopped in the middle of a note. The enormous bronze doors at the far end of the chamber swung open with slow, deliberate grace. A royal herald stepped forward, his ceremonial staff striking the marble floor 3 times. His Majesty King Lucian Ashthorne, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. Silence swept through the hall so completely that even the crackling fireplace seemed to disappear. Every noble, every elder, every servant immediately lowered their heads. Hundreds of voices became one as they bowed before their ruler. Damien Holloway straightened his ceremonial jacket in nervous haste before dropping to one knee beside the other future alphas. His confident smile had vanished, replaced by careful respect. Evelyn lowered her gaze with everyone else, never imagining that the mysterious stranger from the garden now stood only a few yards away. King Lucian entered without rushing, his measured footsteps echoing across the polished stone. His dark formal coat bore the silver crest of the royal bloodline stitched across the shoulder, while the moonlight shining through the high windows caught the silver strands of his hair. There was no need for raised voices or dramatic gestures. His presence alone transformed the atmosphere inside the room. Conversations that moments earlier had been filled with pride now dissolved into uneasy silence. Lucian acknowledged no one at first. His calm gray eyes slowly traveled across the gathered families, reading expressions more carefully than words ever could. He recognized ambition hidden behind polished smiles. He recognized fear disguised as confidence. Most of all, he recognized how easily the crowd had accepted cruelty simply because it came from someone powerful. The elder stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, it is the highest honor to welcome you to this year's moon ceremony." Lucian offered a polite nod but did not immediately answer. Instead, he looked toward the altar where the broken engagement had taken place only minutes before. The abandoned ceremonial ribbon still rested on the marble floor, untouched by anyone. His gaze lingered there before slowly shifting across the room until it found Evelyn, standing quietly near one of the stone columns. Unlike the others, she was not trying to attract attention. She stood with folded hands and lowered eyes, hoping only to disappear before the evening ended. Lucian studied her expression carefully. There was sadness certainly, but no bitterness. No resentment. No desperate attempt to gain sympathy. The kindness he had witnessed in the garden remained visible even after everything she had endured. The king finally spoke, his calm voice carrying effortlessly through the silent chamber. "Before tonight continues, there is one matter I wish to understand." Every face lifted with cautious curiosity. No one knew what question would come next. Damien looked up confidently, convinced the king's attention would naturally fall upon the strongest future leaders gathered there. Instead, Lucian took one slow step forward, his unwavering eyes never leaving Evelyn Carter. The entire hall followed the direction of King Lucian Ashthorne's gaze until every eye settled upon Evelyn once again. A quiet murmur spread across the room as confusion replaced confidence. Why would the Alpha King, whose attention was usually reserved for rulers and military leaders, concern himself with an ordinary Omega who had just been publicly rejected? Evelyn slowly lifted her head, uncertainty flickering across her gentle features. She had never spoken to the king. She had never even stood close enough to see the remarkable silver color of his eyes until this moment. Lucian walked toward her with measured steps that echoed across the marble floor. No one dared interrupt him. When he finally stopped a respectful distance away, he did something that surprised everyone. He addressed her before speaking to any elder, noble or future alpha. "Miss Carter," he said calmly, "may I ask you a question?" Evelyn swallowed softly before lowering her head with quiet respect. "Of course, Your Majesty." His expression remained composed, revealing nothing beyond sincere curiosity. When you returned the servant's silver cups, what did you hope to gain? The unexpected question puzzled the room. Several nobles exchanged confused glances. They had expected political matters or discussions of strength, not a conversation about a forgotten servant. Evelyn looked briefly toward the elderly man, who still stood quietly near the banquet tables. A small smile touched her lips. Nothing, Your Majesty. He looked frightened. I only wanted to help. Lucian nodded almost imperceptibly before asking another question. And the frightened wolf pup beneath the table? This time the whispers grew louder. Damien frowned in confusion. He had not even noticed the animal. Evelyn answered with the same calm sincerity. It was scared. It deserved kindness just as much as anyone else. Lucian studied her carefully, as though weighing every word against everything he had already witnessed that evening. After everything that happened to you, why did you choose compassion instead of anger? Silence settled once more. Even the musicians waited without moving. Evelyn lowered her eyes for a moment before answering honestly. Because someone else's fear should not become greater simply because my own heart is hurting. Pain does not disappear by passing it to another person. Those simple words drifted through the chamber with unexpected weight. Several elders quietly looked toward one another. Even the elderly servant blinked back grateful tears. Damien folded his arms, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Finally he stepped forward with a polite bow. Your Majesty, Miss Carter has always been gentle. Unfortunately, gentleness alone cannot lead a pack. Lucian slowly turned toward him. His expression remained perfectly calm, yet the room somehow felt colder. Can it not? He asked. Damien hesitated, surprised by the question. A leader must inspire strength. Lucian nodded thoughtfully. Strength. He allowed the single word to linger before continuing. Tell me, Mr. Holloway, when you stood before this pack tonight, which required greater strength, publicly rejecting someone who trusted you, or quietly helping those who could offer nothing in return? Damien opened his mouth but no answer came. For the first time that evening, uncertainty crossed his face. Around them the silence deepened. The nobles who had laughed only minutes earlier no longer seemed certain of their own judgment. And standing in the center of that uneasy stillness, Evelyn realized that the king had not asked those questions to embarrass her. He had asked them so everyone else could finally see what true strength actually looked like. No one spoke after the king's question. The silence stretched across Moonfall Hall until it became impossible to ignore the uncomfortable truth hanging over every guest. Damien slowly lowered his eyes, unable to answer without exposing the emptiness behind his own definition of strength. King Lucian let the silence remain for another moment before turning back toward Evelyn. There was no judgment in his expression, only quiet certainty, as though the answer he had been searching for all evening now stood before him. As their eyes met, an unexpected stillness settled over the chamber. Evelyn felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, gentle rather than overwhelming, like the first rays of sunrise after a long winter night. She could not explain it. It was not fear. It was not embarrassment. It was simply a calm feeling she had never experienced before. Lucian noticed it as well. For years he had searched every kingdom, every gathering, and every royal ceremony, waiting for the ancient bond the elders often described but few ever witnessed. They called it the moon goddess's blessing, a connection that revealed itself not through appearance or status, but through the quiet recognition of two souls guided toward one another. He had dismissed countless introductions arranged by ambitious families because none had awakened that unmistakable sense of peace. Yet standing before Evelyn Carter, the feeling arrived with effortless certainty. The elderly High Elder stepped forward, his weathered eyes widening as he studied the silver pendant resting against the king's chest. The ancient moonstone embedded within it had begun to glow with a soft white light. A ripple of astonishment swept through the elders standing nearby. One after another, they noticed that the small moon-shaped pendant Evelyn had worn beneath her simple gown since childhood now shimmered with the very same gentle radiance. Evelyn instinctively touched the necklace, startled by its warmth. "Your Majesty," the High Elder whispered, barely able to steady his voice, "the moonstone has not awakened in generations." Guests exchanged bewildered looks while quiet murmurs spread across the hall. Damien stared at the glowing pendants, confusion slowly giving way to disbelief. His mother looked toward the elders, searching their faces for an explanation that never came. Lucian gently lifted the royal pendant resting against his chest. "Do you know where your necklace came from?" he asked softly. Evelyn shook her head. "It belonged to my mother. She told me never to take it off, but she passed away before she could explain why." The High Elder closed his eyes briefly, overcome with emotion. "Both pendants were carved from the same sacred moonstone nearly 100 years ago," he said. "Legend tells us they would only awaken when the true queen chosen by the moon goddess stood before the rightful Alpha King." The room became perfectly still. Even those who doubted old legends found themselves unable to look away from the quiet light surrounding the two pendants. Evelyn looked at Lucian with growing uncertainty. "There must be some mistake," she said softly. "I am only an ordinary Omega." Lucian's expression warmed with the faintest smile. "That is what everyone else believed," he replied. "But everything I have seen tonight tells me otherwise." As the moonlight poured through the towering windows above them, the gentle glow surrounding the ancient pendants became brighter, reflecting across the marble floor like silver starlight. For the first time in decades, every elder present realized they were witnessing a moment their ancestors had only described in forgotten stories, and every person in the hall understood that the evening they expected to end with one broken engagement was about to become the beginning of something far greater. The soft silver light faded slowly, but the silence inside Moonfall Hall only grew deeper. Every noble, every elder, and every servant remained frozen where they stood, struggling to understand what they had just witnessed. King Lucian. Ashthorne took one measured step toward Evelyn Carter, his steady gaze never leaving hers. There was no hesitation in his expression, no uncertainty, only the quiet confidence of a ruler who had reached a decision after careful observation rather than impulse. Damien Holloway suddenly stepped forward, his composure beginning to crack. "Your Majesty," he said, forcing a respectful bow. "Surely an ancient legend cannot outweigh reason. She is only an ordinary Omega. There are daughters of high Alpha families here who are far more suitable to stand beside the throne." Several influential nobles nodded cautiously, relieved that someone had spoken what they had been thinking. Lucian slowly turned toward Damien. His calm expression never changed, yet the authority in his voice silenced every whisper before it could begin. "You speak of suitability," he said evenly. "Tell me, Mr. Holloway, what quality do you believe makes a true queen?" Damien answered quickly, eager to recover his confidence. "Strength, noble blood, respected lineage, and the ability to inspire every pack." Lucian considered the answer for only a heartbeat before replying. "Interesting. Tonight I witnessed a frightened servant ignored by nearly everyone in this room. I saw a helpless wolf pup abandoned beneath a banquet table. I watched a woman publicly humiliated before hundreds of witnesses." His eyes slowly swept across the gathered nobles. Only one person responded with compassion instead of pride. Only one person chose dignity instead of revenge. If that is not the ability to inspire a kingdom, then perhaps this kingdom has forgotten the meaning of strength. No one answered. Several elders lowered their eyes in quiet reflection. The elderly servant Evelyn had helped earlier stood silently near the back of the hall, his hands trembling with gratitude. Even the young wolf pup had wandered back through the open doorway and now sat calmly beside Evelyn's feet, as though instinct alone had led it there. Lucian returned his attention to Evelyn. She looked overwhelmed by everything unfolding around her, yet she remained as humble as she had been from the beginning of the evening. "Miss Carter," he said gently, "when everyone else measured your worth by power, you measured others by their need. That is the difference between ruling through fear and leading through compassion." Evelyn's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Your Majesty, I never expected any of this. I only tried to do what felt right." A faint smile touched Lucian's face. "That is precisely why you deserve to be seen." He extended his hand toward her, not as a command but as an invitation. The entire hall watched as Evelyn hesitated for a single breath before placing her hand in his. Lucian carefully helped her step forward until she stood beside him in the center of the chamber where she had once stood alone in humiliation. Then, before every family gathered beneath the moon goddess's light, the Alpha King raised their joined hands and spoke with calm certainty. Hear my words, people of the Northern Territories. Tonight I have witnessed a heart worthy of the highest honor this kingdom can give. From this moment forward, no one in this hall will speak of Evelyn Carter as though she is without value. The woman you failed to recognize shall stand beside the throne, and I will personally see that she is honored with the respect that has always belonged to her. A wave of astonished silence swept across the chamber, and for the first time that evening, every person who had laughed at Evelyn realized they were now standing before the future queen of the realm. For several long seconds no one moved. The king's declaration lingered in the air like the final note of an ancient hymn, impossible to ignore and even harder to challenge. Then the hall erupted into hushed conversations. The same nobles who had laughed at Evelyn only moments before now exchanged uneasy glances, suddenly aware that every careless word they had spoken had been witnessed by the one man whose judgment carried the greatest weight in the kingdom. Damien Holloway stared at the joined hands of King Lucian, and Evelyn as though reality itself had betrayed him. His confident posture slowly crumbled beneath the realization that everything he had dismissed as weakness had become the very reason the Alpha King had chosen her. His mother stepped forward first, forcing a polite smile that did little to hide her panic. Your Majesty, she began carefully, perhaps we judged Miss Carter too quickly. Our family has always respected kindness. Surely there has been a misunderstanding. Lucian regarded her with calm eyes. Has there? He asked quietly. The simple question carried more weight than any accusation. The woman lowered her gaze, unable to answer honestly. Damien finally gathered enough courage to step closer. Evelyn, he said, his voice noticeably softer than before. Perhaps I allowed pride to cloud my judgment. We have shared years together. Surely that should count for something. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. She searched his face, remembering the promises beneath the cedar tree, the dreams they had once imagined together, and the words he had spoken before the entire pack only a short time ago. There was sadness in her eyes, but no anger. She realized that forgiveness and returning to the past were not the same thing. I truly hope you become the man you once promised you would be, she answered gently. But I cannot build my future on the version of you that only appears after opportunity has changed. Her quiet honesty settled over the room with remarkable grace. Damien lowered his head, recognizing that there were no arguments left to make. The chance he had discarded could not simply be reclaimed because someone else had recognized its value. Around the hall, the attitudes of the guests continued to shift. The elders who had remained silent during Evelyn's humiliation now approached one by one to offer respectful bows. The elderly servant she had helped earlier stepped forward with trembling hands. Miss Carter, he said with heartfelt emotion, you treated me with kindness when no one else even saw me. Thank you. Evelyn smiled warmly and accepted his gratitude with the same humility she had shown from the beginning. King Lucian watched every exchange without interruption. The more people revealed themselves, the more certain he became that his decision had been the correct one. He turned toward the High Elder. Prepare the Hall of Moonlight, he instructed. Calmly. At tomorrow evening's gathering, the kingdom will witness a ceremony worthy of this moment. The High Elder bowed deeply. It will be done, Your Majesty. A quiet wave of anticipation swept through the crowd. What had begun as an ordinary mating ceremony would now become an event remembered for generations. As guests slowly parted to create a clear path through the center of the hall, King Lucian offered his arm to Evelyn with simple courtesy. She accepted it with quiet dignity, not because she desired a throne, but because she finally understood that true honor was never something another person could grant or take away. It had always lived within her, waiting for someone wise enough to recognize it. The following evening, the Hall of Moonlight glowed beneath hundreds of silver lanterns, their gentle light reflecting across polished marble like stars scattered upon a quiet lake. Representatives from every pack throughout the Northern Territories gathered in respectful silence, aware they were about to witness a ceremony unlike any recorded in living memory. King Lucian Ashthorne stood before the ancient throne wearing the traditional royal mantle, not as a distant ruler surrounded by privilege, but as a man whose greatest decision had been guided by character rather than appearance. Across the hall, Evelyn Carter walked forward in a graceful ivory gown that remained elegant through its simplicity. Her silver moon pendant rested over her heart, glowing softly beneath the lantern light. She had not changed who she was overnight. She still greeted every servant with a warm smile, still thanked those who opened the great doors, and still paused to kneel beside the same little white wolf pup that happily greeted her before taking her place beside the throne. The High Elder raised the sacred staff toward the moonlit ceiling. Before the moon goddess and every pack gathered here, we recognize the woman whose heart has already proven worthy of the crown. A peaceful hush filled the chamber. King Lucian stepped forward and offered Evelyn his hand once more. This time she accepted it without hesitation, not because she sought power but because she finally understood that true leadership begins with compassion. The High Elder carefully placed the Queen's circlet upon her head. At that very moment, the twin moon pendants shone together once again, filling the hall with gentle silver light that caused every guest to look upward in quiet wonder. One by one, the gathered leaders lowered their heads in respect. Among them stood Damien Holloway. The same man who had once believed Evelyn stood beneath him now bowed with everyone else, not because he was forced to, but because truth had become impossible to deny. Evelyn noticed him only briefly before returning her attention to the people before her. There was no triumph in her eyes, no desire to make anyone feel small. She simply hoped the kingdom would become a place where kindness was never mistaken for weakness again. King Lucian looked toward the assembled packs and spoke with calm conviction. A kingdom is not measured by the strength of its loudest voices. It is measured by how it treats those who have the least power to defend themselves. Let this day remind every generation that compassion is not the opposite of strength. It is its highest form. Warm applause slowly filled the Hall of Moonlight, growing stronger with every passing second until it echoed beyond the palace walls and into the quiet forest beyond. And so the woman many had overlooked did not become great because a crown rested upon her head. She became great because even when the world questioned her worth, she never allowed cruelty to change the goodness within her heart.